This story happened a year ago. We lived in a townhouse in the suburbs, pretty safe area. There had been some robberies a couple blocks away, but they weren't common, and I felt pretty safe, walking home alone at night. So one weekend, my boyfriend's brother Marshall and his girlfriend Amy and her brother Curtis were visiting. We were all just gonna chill, have a couple drinks, play video games, and relax. My boyfriend had his LSATs, and after months of hard studying, he wanted to just relax before the exam. Unfortunately, I ended up getting very sick. It was the worst flu that I've ever had. Extremely high fever, nausea, headache, body aches, and all that good stuff. Of course, I didn't want to stop my friends from having a good time, so they came over anyways, and I just stayed in my room. They went out to eat before they came over, so I was in bed alone, watching TV. I felt like I was dying. I slept on and off. At about 4 p.m., I heard the door open and I figured they were back, but when I called out for my boyfriend, no one came. Even if he was there, he probably wouldn't have heard me, but I knew that he would come check on me as soon as he came back. So I assumed that I just heard something fall or the neighbors were making noises, so I dismissed it and went back to sleep. I remember I was sleeping on my back, and in a deep sleep I groggily opened my eyes and thought I saw a figure move across my room. I was so heavily medicated and so sick, I didn't even fully understand what had happened and what that meant. I saw the figure, but it didn't connect in my brain that I may have seen someone, and since it was pretty dark in the room, I think part of me just thought it was the TV. Finally, at around 7 p.m., everyone came back. They were loud. Amy, my boyfriend's brother's girlfriend, was very tipsy, and she's very fun when she's drunk, so there was lots of laughter. My boyfriend came in to check on me, just like I knew he would. He brought me soup. He sat and talked about his day as I ate it. I asked him to look in the basket under the bed to get the new bottle of aspirin. We had a full-sized bed, and I had one small basket under the bed where I kept extra pill bottles, toothbrushes, shaving cream, and stuff like that. I didn't know it right away, but thank God he looked under the bed. He put his head up and handed me the aspirin, but his facial expression had changed, like he lost all the color from his face. I didn't think much of it and said, "Thank you. Come on, I'm going to take you to the bathroom." He never stutters. I was out of it, but I remember picking up on it. I told him no, I really didn't have to pee, and I didn't feel like getting up. And then he said, "No, let's go. I don't want to have to climb back up the stairs just because you need to pee in 10 minutes. I remember feeling pretty hurt by his words, but I knew that he was right, since I just had soup and a bottle of water. He walked me downstairs, and I couldn't understand why we didn't just go to the bathroom upstairs. I think I was so sick, I just felt too exhausted to question it. He sat me down on the couch. "What's going on?" He took out his phone, and his hand was shaking. I asked what was wrong, and I will never forget how my heart sunk and I felt like I couldn't breathe when he whispered, "There was someone under the bed." Amy laughed, so I laughed thinking it was a prank, but it felt serious. My boyfriend's brother suggested we get out of the house, so we did. And as we were leaving, we heard a thud upstairs. We quickly left and drove away, and then called the police. The police came and searched the house, but they didn't find anyone. He must have known that we suspected that he was there, and then left. My boyfriend couldn't give any description, only that he saw some sneakers, but it was so dark he didn't see a face or anything else. The scariest thing that still leaves me on edge is that the police found a knife under the bed. It was a small steak knife, very dull and rusty. There weren't any killings in the area, so my friends assumed that he just wanted a place to sleep. I'm not really sure how he got into our place, but I have some theories. I'm really proud of how my boyfriend handled everything. He's a calm and collected person, but I always assumed he wouldn't be that way in a crisis. I really hope that this person doesn't come around again. A few winters ago, I got a job as a security guard. My responsibilities were to guard the construction site of a 3-story industrial building that was in development. This was a super sweet job. All I had to do was be at the construction site between the hours of 7 p.m. and 3 a.m. I could sit in my truck the entire time except for 2 different times that I was instructed to patrol the site. What I would do is get out of my truck and walk the perimeter of this site and then go inside and shine my flashlight around. This obviously wasn't a hard task, but it was a bit creepy. It was pitch black around this site at night, and there were no working lights anywhere. Every time I patrolled, I was a bit creeped out. Except for one evening, where the creepiness turned into straight-up terror. The night was going by normally. I was watching YouTube videos and listening to music in my truck. The clock hit 1 a.m., and I was due to complete my second patrol through the site. The first patrol went by completely normal, and I had no reason to expect any different this time around. So I jumped out of the truck and started down the path that led around the site. I was shining my flashlight in front of me the whole time and saw nothing out of the ordinary. This trek around the site took the most time out of the patrol, and I'd say about 15 minutes after I began, I had circled all the way around and was back at my truck. At this time, I headed inside the building. My truck was parked in front of the building, and so I entered at the front door. The building was still being framed, and there were no doors installed anywhere, including the ones that led to the exterior, and that's the reason I was here, to make sure that nobody walked inside and stole any equipment or vandalized any part of it. As I walked inside, I heard something upstairs. It sounded like a shovel or something had fallen onto the floor, and so I hesitantly started up the stairs to investigate. I was a little bit spooked. What would I do if there was somebody up here messing around? I didn't have a gun or anything, just some pepper spray that the owners gave me. I reached the top of the stairs on the second floor, and I shined my flashlight around, and didn't see anything suspicious. I walked around, and eventually reached the front of the building, and that's when I looked down to my truck through the recently installed window. There was somebody sitting in my truck. He was sitting on the driver's side seat, with his legs still hanging out of the truck facing me. I was just about to turn around and head back down to confront him when he suddenly looked up at me and waved. At that moment, I turned around and ran back to the stairs. I walked down them quickly and ran out of the building. I ran over to my truck and the guy was no longer there. I got very nervous at this point and looked around with my flashlight. I saw nothing and decided to call my boss and let him know that there was a man here. As the phone was ringing, I searched my truck and saw that nothing was missing and everything was where I left it. My boss didn't answer, and so I left a very short message stating, "It's 1:22 a.m. and there is someone messing around the site, and I have not located him yet. I shine my light around like a madman, searching for this potentially dangerous person, and thought it would be a better idea to get in my truck and drive slowly around the site." This didn't take long, and I didn't see anyone. I circled back to the front and parked my truck in the same exact spot that I was in before. I put the truck in park and called my boss again. I got no answer and got out of the truck once again. I stood next to my driver's side door and again shined the light around. I didn't see anyone. Then I shined the light up to the window that I had been at when I first noticed him, and saw him standing in the same spot I was at, looking down at me. I realized my job was to stop people from messing around at this site, but this creeped me out so much, I got in my truck and waited until my boss eventually called back. He called the police and an officer showed up there about an hour later. He went inside the building and looked around, but never found the guy. I didn't see him again that night, or any other night I was there. I have no idea who he was or why he was there. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they only had dated for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room and a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places that were listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house, and within 30 minutes she received an email back with all the details and a time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrived, there was a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looked nice, but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opened it. At first, Amanda thinks that she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant was out and he was the landlord, and the occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off, but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven. Only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture, nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping the lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room, and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walked down the hallway into the living room, she noticed the front door had a plank nailed across it. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's giving the guy her thanks for showing me the place bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and that she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door of the house. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs and says, "Ladies first. What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck." Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks outside in front of the house, thinking on her feet. She pretends it's a phone call and answers the phone. "Hey, are you here?" "Yeah, I'll come out from around the back and let you in. Oh, it's great. You have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out the back door. She says that the guy just looked at her like he was very confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother everything. The cops were called, and they took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. At that point, I had had enough. I forgot about getting to the path. I just scooped up my dog off the ground and ran straight up the hill to the side of us and climbed over the little fence that separates the lakes from the street. I looked down. The man didn't follow, but stayed at the bottom of the hill, looking up at us. He was not smiling anymore. I had never seen him before, and haven't seen him since. And I really hope that it stays that way. I don't know exactly what his intentions were, but it seemed to me like he was using my dog's obedience to slow me down, to keep me from getting away from him. So I really doubt his intentions were good. I'm glad I didn't stick around to find out. At that point, I had had enough. I forgot about getting to the path. I just scooped up my dog off the ground and ran straight up the hill to the side of us and climbed over the little fence that separates the lakes from the street. I looked down. The man didn't follow, but stayed at the bottom of the hill, looking up at us. He was not smiling anymore. I had never seen him before, and haven't seen him since. And I really hope that it stays that way. I don't know exactly what his intentions were, but it seemed to me like he was using my dog's obedience to slow me down, to keep me from getting away from him. So I really doubt his intentions were good. I'm glad I didn't stick around to find out. When I was a teen, I never had much of a rebellious side, but my parents didn't want me in their bathroom when they weren't home. They had a fantastic shower as compared to the leaky piece of crap that I was stuck with. We'd had a minor spat this particular morning, and they left to quote-unquote clear their heads. That meant it was time to use the fancy shower. I was alone, and they had been gone about a half an hour. Then I suddenly hear my dad stomp into the bedroom. He slammed his keys down, checked the answering machine, and I knew that he had to have been pissed, so I called out. My shower drain was leaking again. I'm sorry, I'll be out in a minute. And then I heard him stomp over to the bathroom door, and then stop. I called out to him and he starts jiggling and turning the handle like crazy. The weird thing is, the door wasn't locked. So I stepped out of the shower quickly and wrapped a towel around me and began saying, "What the hell?" As I opened the door, I opened it while it was in mid-shake, watching the knob turn, and there was no one on the other side when the door opened. I ran through the apartment and saw that we still had a message on the machine, and the front door was still locked. My parents came home 2 hours later. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times, and I would stay up later than anybody else, just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood, and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw and to go back to bed, I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that there was nothing there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us, and then slowly stood up with the knife." My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while we went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming and she freaked out, grabbed the knife, and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I haven't slept in the living room since. I left work late one night, later than usual. I was driving home when I unexpectedly ran into some construction going on, and I was forced to take a detour. I turned right onto a street I rarely ever drove on, and haven't been on in years. The street took me into the downtown area of my city, and it wasn't a very nice place to be. Crime happened here all the time, and it made me nervous, especially because it was late and there were no other vehicles around. I stopped at a stop sign and apparently made a wrong turn because I looked around and noticed the detour signs were gone. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket sitting on the passenger seat in order to use GPS so I didn't get too lost and to guide me home. As I was navigating my phone, I heard a noise outside. I looked up from my phone to see what it was. As I looked around, I spotted a woman about 30 yards from my car in the parking lot of a convenience store that was now closed. She was standing off by the corner of the store where it was much darker. Right after I saw her, I noticed that she looked scared, and then almost immediately I saw a man reach out from the side of the building she was standing next to, grab her by the arm, and pull her out of sight. The woman had made a noise again. This scared me to death, and I wasn't sure what to do. My first thought was that he might have been trying to rob her. I was about to dial 911 on my cell phone when I realized he might be trying to do something worse. I'm not the toughest guy in the world and have only been in a couple fights in my life, but I'll be damned if this woman was going to be raped or killed while I was right here. So I take a deep breath and opened my car door. After I did this, I heard the woman again. It sounded like she was half screaming, half calling for help, but all her noise sounded muffled like the man was covering her mouth. I walked around to the back of my car and started towards where she had disappeared out of sight. I walked fast, but tried to be as silent as possible. As I walked, her sounds were abruptly cut off, and I got scared. Scared of what I might see, scared of what I might have to do. I reached the corner of the store and very slowly looked down into the dark side of the building. At first, I saw nothing, and so I moved closer. And that's when I saw them. I saw them both standing in the darkness, side by side, like statues. He wasn't touching her. She wasn't crying or screaming. and they weren't fighting. I realized quickly what was happening now. I immediately turned around and started a sprint back towards my car. As my feet hit the ground, I could hear that they were chasing me. I got to my car and threw the door open and got inside. I locked the door, and right after I did, they were both attempting to open the doors from both sides. I put my key in the ignition, started it, and stomped the pedal to the floor. I was so shaken up over what had just happened that I ran 2 stop signs right after. I drove home and never saw their faces up close. And you bet your ass, I haven't been down that street since. I know someone from my childhood who used to work as a chef. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah had to prepare a dinner party for a politician, but she and her workmates had run out of some ingredients, and since she drove a motorcycle, she offered to rush to a nearby store that was a few miles away. The house they were working for was settled on a hill. Aside from a few houses, there weren't any stores or establishments in the area. The road was empty. There was no one around. Sarah finished the errand and began to drive back. She was halfway on her journey when she felt a weight push against her back. Startled, she glanced at her rearview mirror and saw an unfamiliar woman with matted hair sitting in the back of her motorcycle, smiling and staring directly at her. Sarah was so shocked she nearly lost control of her motorcycle. She concentrated as hard as she could and revved the accelerator as fast as it would go. She began cursing at the woman, telling her to get off the bike. In the distance, she heard the woman laugh, and suddenly, her motorcycle felt lighter. She couldn't feel anything pressing up against her anymore. She dared to glance at her rearview mirror again, and thankfully, she saw no one. When she arrived at the house, she was trembling. She knew that she would sound delusional and possibly even gain a bad reputation at her job. But she told the people there about what she saw, and to her astonishment, a couple of the politician's security guards chuckled and told her that this was normal around here. Apparently, a few other motorists living in the area also endured the same encounter. My family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century, disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area, and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods, so an aunt of some unknown number of greats, preceding her relationship to me, dies of some disease, and she gets buried in the family cemetery on the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral, the 2 dogs stuck near her grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it when a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly, but they weren't just at the grave, they were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out, her fingers are raw and bloody and mangled. On the inside of the cask door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now, that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just come to my room. I went to pick up, and the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, got up, and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in, and of course, nobody was there. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow right next to her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She tells me that her phone is not even in her room, and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is actually downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. We never managed to make sense of this. My husband and I had just moved into a new house in a new state with our then 3-year-old. Naturally, I needed to go food shopping for pretty much everything. It was dark by the time I arrived home, and I could see, upstairs, in what is now our bedroom, what I was sure was my husband standing in the window. The light was on, so it was pretty easy to see that he was standing there. I needed help unloading the car, so I went straight inside to find him on the other side of the house, completely immersed in a video game. Clearly had been there the whole time, but I asked anyways. And sure enough, he hasn't been upstairs since I left. My husband and I lived in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other on the side of the house, which opens up into the laundry room. When we were too busy or it's too late to walk our dog, we hook his collar onto a long line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corner of our house so that he can use the bathroom. We used to do this from the door in our laundry room, but we had noticed the large step from the door to the ground had been taking a toll on his hips. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead, since the porch is much closer to the ground. This particular night, I was home alone with my dog, and it was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up to his line, close the door, and lock it before heading into the kitchen to put away the dishes. This was pretty routine. Even if he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front inside of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door. That's what my dog does when he wants to come in, so I head over to let him back inside. Since I've watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening it. Out of habit, I look to check that my dog is in front of the door. Instead, I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch, this one louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock, and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but he says that he's heading home. This is when I realize my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed, looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere, and the side of my house is covered in gravel. I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and to get a better look at him. I considered calling the police, but I didn't feel that they would take me seriously since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house. I tried taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take pictures of the peephole and not the images behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knew I was there. Malicious grin. He stood there that way for a few seconds, and with that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back and start pounding on the door. Luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. He convinced me to call the police, and we went out looking for our dog. It turns out that this man had cut the end of the line connected to the pipe, and our dog decided this was a good time for him to explore my neighbor's backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened. We've since moved to a new house, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspects. We take our dog on very long walks before the sun goes down. I went camping in Big Sur, California, with one of my best friends. It was off-season and a Sunday night, so the place was practically empty. We picked a campsite about a half-mile walk to the ocean. It was in a huge open field, surrounded by a lush forest. In the background were limestone mountains, and you could hear the crashing of the ocean's waves. We spent the night around a campfire telling stories and eating. We're both pretty experienced backpackers too. We are very diligent in ensuring we do not leave any trace of food by our site. I have my dog with me too. She was leashed around one of the few trees in the field on a long metal leash and full harness. It's a full moon, and it was pouring beautiful blue light across the field. It was absolutely pristine and breathtaking. Around 1 a.m., something spooks my dog. Now she is used to the woods, but she is flipping out. tugging hard on the leash like she is desperate to escape. She pulls so hard that her harness snaps, and she goes bolting across the field into the wilderness. I lose my cool. I drop everything and bolt after her. I'm not thinking straight, running into the woods at night. My only concern was getting her, even if it meant risking my own safety. I rescue her. I find her curled up in a random clearing in the woods, looking ashamed and terrified. Thank God she ran in a straight line, otherwise I would have been totally lost. I walk back carrying her, and my heart is pounding furiously at the horror of the idea of her being lost in the wilderness forever. The thought now is still unbearable. I can feel her heart pounding too in my arms. She's terrified. I'm no longer in a great mood. But my dog won't lay down. We all head to bed. She refuses. Her ears are up, and she's staring intensely at the tent wall as if she could see right through it, and she's tracking something. It takes a while for my nerves to calm down from my chase earlier. I'm working hard at deep breaths and reminding myself that I'm prepared for anything that I could encounter, that my dog is simply spooked from maybe a raccoon. Maybe she's just exhausted and acting up. Then I hear it, cackling, like a high-pitched laughter that is full of a disgusting type of joy. And it's coming from outside my tent. My senses go on high alert. My body tenses up so tightly, it's like I'm about to break in half. I can't even breathe. And then I hear more cackling, like a group of witches were doing something evil just yards away. It fills my ears, laughing and more laughing. It's loud, and it just sounds so wrong. I can't even bring myself to move to look at my friend. It's like my entire body has given up. The laughs are then followed up with blood-curdling screams. It honestly sounded like somebody was being murdered. It was full of panic and horror and sadness. Dear God. It could have been wolves or coyotes killing their prey, but it sounded so distinctly human. The laughter, the sobbing, the screams. Finally, my friend says something. What the hell? I even began to laugh a little because the situation was so intense and wild. I had no idea how else to react. I can't handle this, I say, and suggest that we bolt for the car. It's a mile away, so we decide to stay. We just listened to the laughter and screaming until it faded away. When it was over, I didn't bother going to bed.